This year, I have seen many ballots discussing trigger warnings. Put your trigger warning on the board. This allows people to leave with a non-admittedity as opposing to having to out themselves right before you begin your speech. Make sure to give a verbal warning, not just on the board or in chat. And of course, my favorite, thank you for the content warning. However, to appear that it makes sure you take it seriously, you should formalize the warning and use specific language. I understand that judges want a trigger warning, but how many different ways can I say it? Furthermore, the New Yorker in 2021 suggests that trigger warnings do not seem to lessen the negative reaction to disturbing material in students, trauma survivors, and those diagnosed with PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Worryingly, these researchers have discovered that trigger warnings seem to increase the extent to which people see trauma as central to their identity, which can only worsen the impact of PTSD. Many forensics tournaments require trigger warnings, but the truth is they don't work according to The Atlantic in 2019, Slate in 2019, and The New Yorker in 2021. So why are we still using them? Let's discuss the causes of trigger warnings, the effects of using them, and some solutions to regulating trigger warnings in forensics. There are a few causes that explain the societal shift pushing these trigger warnings into play. The large use of trigger warnings by the news media has led to an infatuation with trigger warnings, according to the Swaddle in May of 2022. Many people use trigger warnings because they have genuine concern for those impacted by traumatic events. Philosopher Kate Mann believes that we should use trigger warnings because it would allow for a reduction in anxiety when reading an article, according to the New York Times in 2021. The New York Times in 2023 suggests that we live in a world of bad news bias, meaning that there's more triggering news than ever, and we need trigger warnings more now than ever before. While well-intentioned, trigger warnings are not helping, but rather harming people. 28% of people who see this bad news in the social media have reported high levels of depression and anxiety, according to the Pew Research Center in December of 2022. Greg Luthanoff and Jonathan Haidt, in their 2018 book, The Coddling of the American Mind, explained that a rise of safetyism in American society has led to beliefs and practices such as trigger warnings that hinder college students' socio-emotional development. COVID-19 did not help with college students' socio-emotional development, with 58% of people aged 18 to 29 reporting high levels of psychological distress, according to the Pew Research Center in December of 2022. We continue to use trigger warnings without understanding the effects of using them. The effects of trigger warnings include how they are more harmful than helpful, and they do not allow everyone in forensics to participate. Trigger warnings, while well-intentioned, are harming more than they're helping, and there's many different reasonings behind this. According to Peyton Jones, a clinical psychologist in 2019, trigger warnings seem to increase anxiety more than not saying trigger warning at all. Jones also stated that people tend to see a trigger warning and go through with their task anyways. For example, if you were triggered by sexual assault, saw an article on sexual assault, and continued to read the article after seeing the trigger warning. According to psychologist Richard McNally in 2022, if you want a trigger warning, you should seek treatment for PTSD, including gradual systemic exposure to traumatic events until their capacity to trigger distress diminishes. Trigger warnings do not allow people to heal properly from their trauma, but instead encourage them to shy away from their past. Trigger warnings impact us in forensics by who is allowed to use them and who is allowed to follow them. According to speechanddebate.org, there are 3 main reasons why you should join speech and debate. 1, get over your fear of academic speaking and public speaking. 2, gain an academic standing. And 3, use your voice to change the world. We cover so many heavy topics in forensics because it gives us a voice. But what happens if no one wants to listen because it's too triggering? Both students and judges can easily be triggered. However, when a judge hears a trigger warning, like yourself, you are not excused from hearing the speech. We can never truly know if we're going to be triggering someone because our triggers vary so widely. SpeechAndDebate.org has lots of resources on how not to judge students who may walk out of a triggering speech, but little to no resources on what a judge should do if they are triggered by a speech. I should not be placed down because this is a matter of my platform to speak about matters that are important to me. Speech allows individuals with trauma to heal by speaking uncomfortable truths, and no one should have to shy away from a controversial topic because that is counterintuitive to the purpose of this activity. Finally, forensics is seen as an academic activity, so we should expect solid evidence before supporting and requiring trigger warnings on ballots. Overall, trigger warnings have been proven to be harmful to victims and do not allow an escape for judges in forensics. Trigger warnings are more harmful than helpful, and they impact us in universities and forensics. So we need to find a way to regulate them. I have two solutions to trigger warnings. First, use a system of trauma-informed care, or TIC, to heal. And second, we should regulate them in our forensics community. Trauma-informed care would help with the trigger warning so that you could heal properly from your trauma. According to Dr. Shannon Taylor in 2021, research has indicated that the best way for someone who has experienced trauma is through a system of trauma-informed care. A system of TIC utilizes practices that appropriately respond to trauma and minimize the likelihood of re-traumatization. Trauma-informed care acknowledges the need to understand a patient's life experiences. It has the potential to increase patient adherence, treatment adherence, patient engagement, treatment adherence, and health outcomes according to the Center for Healthcare Strategies. People need to find a way to seek through and work through their trauma. Maybe therapy is too expensive, but it only takes 10 minutes to listen to my speech, and maybe it can potentially help you move through your trauma. Fellow competitors need to hear what I and other competitors have to say. So we need to find a way to regulate trigger warnings in forensics. My solution is simple. Write the topic of your speech next to your name when you sign in, or online, and put it right next to your title. This would allow for everyone to know the topic of everyone's speeches and walk out if they need to, but psychology says that they shouldn't. We need to find a way to regulate these trigger warnings so that people can heal properly from their trauma. But until they make that decision to heal properly from their trauma, we have to find a way to make sure that these trigger warnings are taken care of seriously. Finally, if we didn't want to trigger other people, we should move to completely asynchronous tournaments where we don't see each other's speeches. As quick and easy as asynchronous tournaments are, I prefer to be in person, and if you agree and want to find a way to implement this, I will put a QR code link in the video so that you can see and sign my petition for putting my solution into forensics. My solution and my petition will be sent to the National Speech and Debate Organization at the end of this season. I want to continue to be in person, but we have to find a way to regulate trigger warnings until people make the decision to move through trauma-informed care systems. So today we discussed the causes of trigger warnings, the effects of using them, and some solutions to regulating trigger warnings in forensics. According to the National Speech and Debate Organization in 2018, speakers have the potential to make meaningful changes with their speech. We have powerful voices. I unfortunately cannot make any meaningful changes with my speech if I am judged before I even begin because I said trigger warning. Your triggers are your responsibility.